Welcome back to our channel. Today we'll explore the story of Victoria Gifford Kennedy. She was the daughter of an American sports legend and the wife of a member of the prestigious Kennedy family. Her dream life turned into a nightmare when a shocking scandal broke. Her husband, Michael Kennedy, had an affair with the family's underage babysitter. But even before the scandal had even settled, an unexpected tragedy struck, turning betrayal into tragedy. This is the story of how Victoria dealt with it all and why she later took an unconventional path, going completely silent and disappearing from the public eye to reclaim her life from the ashes. To understand Victoria's journey, you have to understand the two worlds she stepped into. Imagine the America of the 1950s and 60s. It was a time of immense optimism, of burgeoning television culture, and of larger-than-life heroes. In the world of American sports, few heroes were larger than Frank Gifford. He wasn't just a football player, he was an icon. As the charismatic, handsome star of the New York Giants, Gifford was the epitome of the all-American male. He had the talent, the looks, the charm. He transitioned seamlessly from the football field to the broadcast booth, becoming one of the most beloved faces on ABC's Monday Night Football. He didn't just play the sport, he embodied it. With his radiant smile and flawless public image, in the kingdom of sports, he was royalty. Victoria Gifford was born into this world in 1957. She was Frank's daughter with his first wife, USC's homecoming queen, Maxine Ewart. From the very beginning, life was a swirl of celebrity, privilege, and the unique pressures that come with having a famous father. She and her siblings, Jeff and Kyle, grew up accustomed to the limelight, but it was a reflected light, one that always bounced off their famous dad. In a rare interview, an old family friend recalled, Victoria was always a very grounded, very practical girl. She saw the flip side of fame, both the glamour and the price it demanded. She loved her father, but she also knew he didn't just belong to her. At the same time, another American family was carving out its own dynasty, not on the gridiron, but in the far more brutal arena of politics, the Citus Kennedys. Under the leadership of the patriarch Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., this family was a force of nature. They were driven, ambitious, and blessed with a seemingly endless supply of charm and photogenic smiles. With John F. Kennedy's election to the presidency in 1960, they became America's royal family. Camelot was the name given to their reign, a word that conjured images of beauty, splendor, and a bright future. But their story was one of dazzling triumphs interwoven with shocking tragedies. Assassinations, accidents, and scandals seemed to follow them like a dark shadow. Michael Lemoyne Kennedy, whom Victoria would one day marry, was born in 1958, just a year after Victoria. He was the sixth of 11 children of Robert F. Kennedy and Ethel Skakel Kennedy. He grew up in the heart of the Kennedy whirlwind, a life of touch football on the lawn at Hickory Hill, sailing off the coast of Hyannisport, and the constant crushing weight of public expectation. His childhood was defined by the towering legacy of his uncles, President John F. Kennedy and Senator Ted Kennedy, and most of all, his father, RFK. Michael was only 10 years old when his father was assassinated in 1968, a trauma that would irrevocably shape him and his siblings. One of his friends from his youth said, there was a frenetic energy and a deep sadness in those Kennedy kids. You could see them looking for their father's approval even after he was gone. He inherited the Kennedy looks, the famous toothy grin, and that restless, competitive energy that was the family's trademark. He also inherited a particular bravado, a tendency for risk-taking that sometimes crossed the line into recklessness. These two worlds, the Giffords and the Kennedys, Sports royalty and political royalty were destined to collide. They moved in similar circles of wealth, power, and fame, and for a bright, beautiful young woman like Victoria Gifford and a charismatic, energetic young man like Michael Kennedy, it was perhaps only a matter of time before their paths crossed, setting in motion a story of love, heartbreak, and unimaginable loss. Their meeting wasn't exactly a fairy tale, but it was certainly a product of its time in their unique social circles. Victoria and Michael were both students at the University of Virginia in the late 1970s, but their real connection was forged through a shared passion: skiing. The Kennedys were avid skiers, known for their daring, often reckless approach to the slopes in Aspen, Colorado. Victoria, too, was an accomplished skier, having spent many holidays there with her family. Their courtship blossomed amidst the snow-capped mountains and the bustling social scene of the Kennedy clan. To an outsider, they seemed like the perfect match. Victoria was not just beautiful. She was grounded, intelligent, and seemed unfazed by the larger-than-life Kennedy aura. Michael was charming, energetic, and possessed that signature Kennedy confidence. Friends from that time recall a genuine affection between them. Victoria offered a sense of stability and warmth, a quiet counterpoint to the often chaotic energy of the Kennedy family. They married on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1981, in a grand ceremony in New York City. Victoria was 24, Michael was 23. It was a union of two American dynasties. The guest list was a who's who of politics, sports, and media. Frank Gifford walked his daughter down the aisle, a proud patriarch from one great house giving his daughter to another. Ethel Kennedy, the formidable matriarch of her clan, welcomed a new daughter-in-law. For a moment, it seemed like a storybook ending, or rather, a storybook beginning. After the wedding, they settled in Cohasset, a wealthy seaside suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. It was a deliberate choice to be close to the heart of the Kennedy world in Hyannisport, but just far enough away to carve out their own life. Michael, who had earned his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law, didn't follow the traditional Kennedy path directly into politics. Instead, he made his mark in the business world. He ran his older brother Joe's nonprofit Citizens Energy Corporation, which provided low-cost heating oil to the poor and elderly. He was successful, driven, and seen as one of the more responsible and business-savvy of the Kennedy children. Victoria, for her part, embraced the role of a Kennedy wife and mother. They had 3 children in quick succession: Michael Lemoyne Kennedy Jr., born in 1983, followed by Kyle Francis in 1984, and Rory Gifford in 1987. She created a warm and stable home, a sanctuary from the intense public scrutiny that was a constant companion to anyone with the last name Kennedy. She was known for her devotion to her children, her sharp wit, and her down-to-earth nature. She organized family ski trips, managed their bustling household, and supported her husband's career. From the outside, they had it all: a beautiful family, wealth, success, and the Kennedy name. They were part of the glamorous, seemingly unbreakable fabric of America's most famous political family. But within the Kennedy clan, there were unwritten rules and unspoken pressures. There was a culture of intense competition, a demand for loyalty, and a certain tolerance for the reckless behavior of its men. Many stories recount that their private life was not always perfect. Michael, despite his success in business, still carried the restlessness of a Kennedy. He was known as a party goer, a fast liver, and had a certain knack for finding trouble. One friend described him as a guy who could switch from being the most fun person in the room to the most dangerous in a heartbeat. There were silent personal struggles, tensions kept within the family. Victoria, a person accustomed to the control and composure of her father's world, had to learn to navigate the erratic currents of Kennedy life. And as the years went by, the perfect facade of Victoria and Michael's life began to show cracks. The vibrant energy that had once been so attractive in Michael began to curdle into something more dangerous, a pattern of risk-taking and entitlement that would ultimately lead to their downfall. The storybook romance was heading for a dark and devastating chapter. The late 1990s were a turbulent time for the Kennedy family. Another generation was coming of age, and with it came a new wave of scandals that threatened to tarnish the carefully curated Camelot legacy. But nothing could have prepared the public or Victoria for the revelation that would shatter her family. The story broke in the spring of 1997, and it was sordid and shocking. News outlets reported that Michael Kennedy was under investigation for statutory rape. The allegation was that he had been having an affair with the family's teenage babysitter. The affair had allegedly begun 3 years earlier, in 1994, when the girl was just 14 years old. Michael was 36 at the time. For Victoria, this wasn't just a headline. It was the catastrophic implosion of her world. The betrayal was profound and multifaceted. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a betrayal of trust. With a young girl who had been in their home, cared for their children, and looked up to them. And the discovery of the affair was, according to reports, utterly cinematic in its horror. The story, as pieced together from various sources, is that Victoria had grown suspicious. She noticed the small signs, the clumsy lies, the changes in her husband's behavior. She tried to confront him, but Michael, with a classic Kennedy ability for denial, dismissed all accusations. Determined to find the truth, Victoria took matters into her own hands. One day, she arranged to have a car pick up her husband and the babysitter. The car was wired for sound. Victoria and a friend reportedly sat in a nearby vehicle, listening through headphones to a conversation that confirmed her worst fears. The raw, undeniable proof of her husband's betrayal, delivered in his own voice, was a devastating blow. A source speaking anonymously described Victoria as broken, but not defeated. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The scandal became a national obsession. The Kennedy name, already associated with tragedy, was now linked to a tawdry and indefensible act. Michael, who had been managing his Uncle Ted Kennedy's Senate re-election campaign, was forced to step down. The family's powerful PR machine went into overdrive, but this was a stain they couldn't easily wipe away. While the family held press conferences, issued brief statements, and tried to shield Michael, they couldn't control the narrative. For Victoria, the public humiliation was immense, but the private pain was unimaginable. She was the wronged wife, a figure of public sympathy, but also a woman whose most intimate betrayal was being dissected on the evening news and in the pages of tabloid magazines. She filed for divorce. She had to protect her children, not only from the heartbreak of their parents' separation, but from the toxic fallout of their father's actions. Imagine having to explain to your children, then age 14, 13, and 10, why their father was on the cover of every newspaper, accused of something so shameful. Throughout this ordeal, Victoria maintained a remarkable, steely dignity. She refused to speak to the press, shielding her children as best she could from the relentless media storm. While the Kennedys closed ranks, as they always did, Victoria found herself somewhat on the outside. She was still a Kennedy by marriage, the mother of RFK's grandchildren, but the scandal had irrevocably broken her bond with the family's golden son. Friends spoke of her strength and her unwavering focus on her kids. She was grappling not only with her husband's infidelity, but with the destruction of the life they had built over 16 years. The scandal had exposed the dark underbelly of the Kennedy mystique, the sense of entitlement, and the belief that the normal rules didn't apply. For Victoria, who had always been praised for her grounded nature, this must have been a profoundly alienating experience. The dream had become a nightmare, and the worst was yet to come. Just as the dust from the scandal was beginning to settle, tragedy struck again. The date was December 31st, 1997, New Year's Eve. The Kennedys had gathered, as they often did, in Aspen, Colorado, for their annual holiday ski trip. Despite the ongoing divorce proceedings and the lingering bitterness of the affair, Michael and Victoria were both there, attempting to create a semblance of normalcy for their children. The Kennedys were famous for their boisterous, often reckless games of ski football on the slopes of Aspen Mountain. It was a tradition, a way of channeling their famous competitive energy. They would toss a football back and forth while skiing at high speeds down the mountain, weaving between trees and other skiers. It was a dangerous game, a display of the kind of casual fearlessness that was part of their brand. On that fateful afternoon, Michael was playing ski football with several family members, including his children. It was getting late, the light was fading. Eyewitnesses reported that the group was hot dogging, skiing fast and throwing the ball around. Michael, an expert skier, went after a long pass. He wasn't wearing a helmet or ski goggles. He swerved, caught an edge, and slammed headfirst into a tree. A source from a nearby skier said the impact sounded like an explosion. It wasn't a little accident, it was a horrific collision. The impact was catastrophic. His sister Rory Kennedy, a trained emergency medical technician, rushed to his side and administered CPR, but his injuries were too severe. He was rushed to Aspen Valley Hospital, but it was too late. At 5:11 p.m., Michael Kennedy was pronounced dead. He was 39 years old. The news was a stunning blow. For the Kennedy family, it was another entry in their long litany of sorrows. For the public, it was a bizarre and tragic end to a life already mired in scandal. And for Victoria, it was a horror beyond comprehension. The man who had betrayed her, the father of her children, the love of her youth, was gone. The divorce she had initiated would never be finalized. She was now a widow. The aftermath was a blur of grief and media scrutiny. The funeral was held in a small church in Hyannisport. The images from that day are heartbreaking. Victoria, draped in black, her face a mask of grief, standing with her 3 young children as they said goodbye to their father. Frank Gifford stood by his daughter's side, a pillar of support in her darkest hour. One of the most poignant and rarely discussed moments came during the eulogy. Victoria, despite her own pain and the public nature of Michael's betrayal, chose grace. She did not speak herself, but she allowed her children to be part of the service. It was a testament to her character that even in the face of such complex grief for the man he was, anger at the man he had become, and sorrow for the future they would never have, her primary concern was for her children and the memory of their father. In an interview years later, Lawrence Leamer, a Kennedy biographer, shared an insight that speaks volumes about Victoria's quiet strength during this period. He noted that while the world saw a scandal-plagued man, Victoria had to help her children remember a father they loved. She had to navigate a grief that was impossibly complicated. She had to mourn a man who had hurt her deeply, all while the world watched. The accident didn't erase the betrayal, but it added a layer of profound and permanent tragedy. The chapter of her life with Michael Kennedy had not just ended. It had been violently torn out of the book. After Michael's death, the cameras eventually, mercifully, turned away. The Kennedy story machine moved on to the next triumph, the next tragedy. And in the quiet that followed, Victoria Gifford Kennedy made a conscious and deliberate choice. She retreated. She withdrew from the public eye, from the Kennedy social circuit, and from the life that had brought her so much pain. Her focus became singular and absolute, her 3 children. She had every opportunity to capitalize on her story. She could have written a tell-all book, given a high-profile interview, or remained a fixture in the social pages. The public was hungry for details about her life inside the Kennedy clan, but she chose silence. She chose privacy. She chose to heal herself and her family away from the glare of the spotlight that had nearly consumed them. She settled into a quiet life, raising Michael Jr., Kyle, and Rory. She moved away from the Boston area, creating a new home and a new life for her family. This was an act of immense strength. It's one thing to endure a crisis when the world is watching, offering sympathy or condemnation. It's another thing entirely to rebuild a life when the world has moved on, to do the slow, difficult work of healing day by day out of sight. She also found her own voice, not in the media, but in her community. She became involved in charitable work, focusing on causes related to children and education, but she did so without fanfare. It wasn't about photo ops or public recognition. It was about finding purpose and meaning after her world had been stripped of its old certainties. In 1999, she did something that signaled a new chapter. She quietly remarried. Her new husband was Robert Bobby Titcomb Jr., a childhood friend of Michael's. The marriage lasted a few years before they divorced. It wasn't until 2012 that she married Charles C.B. Townsend, a prominent investment banker and CEO of a New York-based company. The wedding was a private affair, a celebration of a new beginning, separate from the worlds of Gifford and Kennedy. It was a declaration that Victoria's story was her own. She was no longer just Frank Gifford's daughter or Michael Kennedy's widow. She was Victoria Townsend, a woman who had overcome the unthinkable and found love and peace on her own terms. Victoria Gifford. Kennedy's legacy lies not in her public career, but in her quiet dignity. She refused to profit from her tragedy, protecting her children and choosing a private life. Her story is a powerful contrast to the Kennedy myth, showing the strength of a woman who dared to walk away from the tragic fate of her family. Her life is a lesson in resilience and the ability to define oneself after tragedy, proving that human worth does not depend on fame or the names you carry, but on the courage to live a full life.